Welcome to the Media Roundtable, Industry Edition, where we dive into the secrets of the craft and provide our perspective on industry topics in service of marketers responsible for the success of their audio program, the Chief Audio Officer. I'm your host, Giles Martin, and today I am joined by some esteemed fellow agents of influence from Oxford Road. They are, please say hello in turn, Jared Klawinski, our Director of Digital Media.
Hi, guys.
Rosemary Scalabrino, our Director of Business Development.
Hello.
Parastu Hosseini, International Audio Manager.
Hi, everyone.
And Stephen Abraham, our very own President of International.
Hello.
And welcome all to the show. It's a special show this week because we were all in London last week at the podcast show, as was our esteemed colleague Miranda, who's unable to join us on the recap episode today. But we are going to use this time to discuss our experience of the show, recap some of the highlights from last week, including, some of the things that sort of we expected, some of the things that caught us off guard, and some of the insights that we are taking from the show and are going to be applying to our work moving forwards. So, there were an awful lot of themes there. I think, generally speaking, as it was last year, I would say it was a very energetic, optimistic, sort of buzzy event. I think that there was in my experience, a sort of really good sense of energy in the room. Again, that was the case last year, but it only seems to be increasing, really. And I think that there was a lot of interesting movement this year with, for example, Apple showing up for the first time to speak at the event and share some new data. We've heard a lot about YouTube's entry into the space and how they're becoming the dominant podcast platform. We're hearing a lot about Spotify's transition to video podcasts, but really interesting to see Apple show up and also for them to share with the event that last year was their best ever year for listenership, and for hours listened and for subscribers. For example, the rest of history, I think they said, now has around 45,000 paying subscribers, with over half of them on annual plans. So I think that it's not time to rule Apple out of the ecosystem yet. I think one of the things that we're really getting a sense of, and I know we will talk a lot more about, is the changes to the ecosystem, the changes to the big platforms out there, because that definitely was a hot topic of conversation across the event. But that's enough for sort of my quick intro. Who'd like to give their overall impression of the event and some of the key things that you picked up on?
I was able to sit in on a few of the panels, but also had conversations with a few of the vendors around, and we really were able to get down into not only GDPR compliance and attribution, but how EU publishers can really assist US brands and vice versa, and kind of overcoming those obstacles. I know GDPR has kind of been around, close to 7 years now, but we're getting into the time where US brands are really starting to break into the market. And in order to push that attribution forward, we're trying to be able to help them overcome that and, understand, navigate some of those areas.
Do you think, Jared or Parastu or Steve even, that we're seeing more sort of willingness and openness on the side of publishers in Europe to consider, Pixel implementation?
I can pick on that. Yes, definitely. We have seen a lot of vendors, especially from the traditional radio networks, that they would like to come to this space and they actually listen to us. It's not only the US-based companies that they require pixel tracking, but a lot of startup companies in Europe looking into measure their performance, and they also look for the solutions. So they were very willing and open for different solutions.
And I think they're taking their cue from the US. Obviously, there's been success with that. Whether they'll be all able to change, I don't know. But perhaps by this time next year, we'll see a marked improvement, which can only be beneficial for all of us. Taking a slight step back to answer your initial question and to sort of add a little bit to what Jared and Parastu were saying, I thought the biggest shift for me in the show this year was that last year it felt much more, and there's a few of us there, exploratory. People were still sort of like figuring stuff out. This year it felt much more decisive. creators were coming in with sort of media kits and monetization strategies, and it just seemed a lot more evolved. It almost felt like the show had grown up. Interestingly, to your point, I felt it was a little bit more Spartan. I didn't see as many people there as I did last year, but that could be because just the layout of the environment was much more, it felt more grown up. It felt smarter. There was more space. There was more dedication to media owners. And the fact that, we saw a lot more international presence was very reassuring for me. I mean, even publishers like NPR were there.
Mm-hmm.
Sirius turned up, and Pushkin Industries had visible teams in London, so it was really. I thought that was a real sort of growth area and a statement of intent for Podcast International.
Sorry, Rosemary, go ahead.
I was just going to piggyback off of Stephen that I noticed that there was a much greater US presence this year than there was last year. Last year when I went, I admit I felt intimidated because I didn't recognize as many attendees, and it did feel like very international. And this year it felt different, and I think it reflects on this like growing focus on the international markets as the next frontier of podcasting.
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Stephen was saying about it sort of feeling perhaps not quite as busy this year. I think I saw in Pod News probably that James was reporting that it was the largest crowd that the show's had, over 6,000 visitors, I think it was, with people coming in from over 40 countries. So, I mean, it may have felt a little different because I think they are still sort of playing around with the structure of the event and some of the layout a bit. But it certainly seemed like, according to these numbers, at least it was a busy showing. And again, yes, higher US presence and really strong international presence as well. So many things that we could talk about. I mean, one of the first meetings that I had was about downloads, and we talk a lot about measurement here at Oxford Road. And often when we talk about measurement, mostly we're talking about attribution, and obviously that's critically important. But one of the things that I noticed, and there were quite a few sort of sessions and meetings going on about this, formal and informal, was about downloads and how they're counted, and particularly, we've known that's always been, a particular, topic that's unique to podcasts in a way that's different from other channels. But particularly with video coming into the space now, a download is obviously not an audio impression necessarily, and an audio impression is not the same as a video view on YouTube, where I believe it's 10 seconds of viewing across any period of the podcast counts as a view. So you've really got these very, very different currencies coming into the marketplace now. And I think the guys at Bumper were saying that they're seeing some of their shows, their download counts are going down because viewers are shifting, or listeners or viewers are shifting to YouTube. And actually, if you look at the audience in totality, the audience is actually higher than it's ever been, but their downloads are low. So, this presents a real challenge for the industry. And I think it's it's right of those guys to be drawing attention to this issue. And it's really interesting to see, how the industry is going to respond to that. And obviously Oxford Road and Dan, when he presented at Podcast Movement Evolutions, was sort of vocal about the need for, more and better standards in the industry to drive more standardization. So that's definitely a theme that I noticed coming out of the event last year. Obviously, video is the sort of bigger, broader topic there. Jared, I see you had a note about video. Anything that you would want to add on that, or anyone? I mean, it's such a big topic.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who's came from the video space over a number of years, it's interesting to see that, as podcasts has kind of started evolving, and so we're almost going back to where video was, 4 or 5 years ago, in pushing content in various different formats and channels through video. It's interesting to kind of see how audio is sat, now kind of picking up or reversing, almost in a way. To be interesting to see how that kind of forms itself.
From my perspective, I believe that international is just on like the cuffs of video of like where the US market was a few years ago. Some of the networks that were international that I spoke to were just getting into it or trying to still figure it out, as most of the buying internationally is predominantly dynamically ad inserted, and so it's difficult to, how do you like marry dynamically ad inserted podcasts with YouTube simulcast, where we're seeing this huge growth of YouTube simulcast. So I think they're still trying to figure that out.
It is going to stay as the global gateway, right? I mean, that's where most people are sort of now accessing it. Countries like India, Brazil, without a shadow of a doubt, they're getting their podcast purely from a YouTube access point.
I mean, the appetite is clearly there. So, I mean, it's like, are they going to be able, as Google, some of the big guys, going to be able to allow us to track in the way we need to be able to track and look at conversions or look at downloads in a different way that video hasn't necessarily traditionally allowed us to do. So going back kind of what Giles was saying about visibility and what Dan said earlier at podcast movement is going to be crucial.
I think it also goes beyond just the technical side of it, and the fact that creators are driving their message purely through video at the beginning anyway now. I mean, look at Stephen Bartlett, Jay Shetty, the guys at High Performance. Their first and foremost push for their messaging is through a podcast, right? So as a consequence, consumers are doing that, and there's going to have to be more attention from all of us to use video as the front door rather than just an audio means.
Yeah, and YouTube, I mean, they were at the event. We had a chat with them, and quite a lot of the conversations that I had with people were about YouTube. So I think it's inevitable that people will be talking about them. And I'm sure that the guys at YouTube heard a lot about the open ecosystem, and because we heard that they heard that from us, and particularly in terms of measurement and attribution, but also in other ways. But I know that they were hearing about downloads and measurement and tracking and data portability from other partners we talked to. So obviously they've sort of been quite public in their commitment to the podcasting space and their interest to get more deeply involved in it. And it was great to see them there, and hopefully that they are listening and really looking hard at what they can do to preserve some of the the magic that makes podcasting special, whilst at the same time supporting creators to continue to grow their content and their audiences. And now a short ad break, courtesy of All City Network. Sports fans don't just follow their teams, they live them. Just ask Stephen Abraham. And at All City Network, they get that. All City is redefining sports media, delivering daily podcasts, pre-game and post-game shows, and community-driven coverage that die-hard fans can't get anywhere else. They're also pushing the boundaries on the industry definition of podcast, striking distribution deals with Roku and Samsung to have live shows streamed across connected TVs in addition to live on YouTube. For brands looking to connect with passionate, engaged sports fans, All City is a community that converts. They offer a range of advertising and sponsorship opportunities, from turnkey mid-roll placements to custom brand integrations and tentpole ownership. With the NFL and football season right around the corner, there's never been a better time to reach engaged sports fans. If you're a decision maker looking for a smarter way to reach sports fans, All City is a strong option that has delivered results for several of our clients. To open a conversation, email advertising@allcitynetwork.com. That's advertising@allcitynetwork.com for your free consultation. So other key themes that we'd like to mention, I think, we've talked about video. It's such an important point. I think, the blurring of lines generally in the industry is such, it's obviously been a hallmark of the internet generally. And I think in podcasting, it's now sort of catching up in the sense that the blurring of lines is really hitting the podcast industry as well. Steve, I think you sat with me. We had a really interesting meeting with a guy from the UK whose name, unfortunately, I can't remember, but was doing branded podcasts, but was cutting them up into sort of, smaller sound bites and running them all over social and using, custom influencer networks to generate, organic content and paid content. And it was just such a different way of thinking about podcasting and even what podcasting is. I mean, any reflections from you on that?
Yeah. I mean, he was fascinating. I can't remember his name either, but he was fascinating. But we'll get his name in here before the end of the show. I thought it was interesting how quickly the conversations moved from monetization to sustainability of the shows. And what I sort of mean by that is, it seems to me that, he wasn't even talking CPMs. He was talking about membership models, IP expansion, brand licensing and sort of live events. And we've seen lots of these examples coming out. So again, I think it's another demonstration of the maturity of the platform. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with Fern Cotton. She's a moderately famous celebrity in the UK, and she has a podcast called Happy Place, and that's evolved into a full sort of lifestyle brand now. She's at festivals. I mean, she's in the music business as well. She's sort of like a bit of an it person with regards to music, but you know, she's got books and products, and I just think that level of diversification before was sort of quite rare in podcasts, and I think it's now the aspiration of most of the content creators to get to that point. So again, not wishing to labour the point, but it's the maturity of it, and I think that can only bode well for all of us. And certainly from what we've been seeing in the industry, and you know, recently I wrote a piece which I shared with some of the group here about the rise of Natively and how they're building out 360 deals, and the fact that we now need to, you know, all of us in the podcast industry can definitely step up because we've got a much better vision of it and can do that for our clients. So any clients out there who want to talk to us about actually putting deals together that aren't just purely audio, but a combination. We're fit to start the business in there.
And I'd like to maybe spend a few minutes just going a bit deeper into any issues around, you know, the global market. Obviously, that's one of the things that sets the podcast show apart from, you know, the podcast movement shows.
I'm going to jump into that straight away.
Yeah, please.
It's my bread and butter.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, localization at scale is the first thing that sort of jumps out to me. Like, you know, publishers like Wondery are localizing all their hit shows. You know, we're seeing much more of that. So I think that's a really interesting perspective from those of us that are buying it specifically from the US. We're seeing monetization across multi-languages. You know, platforms like AdWiz and Triton are all sort of enabling DAI into multiple languages, and that's a currency that's going to be really helpful for all of us as clients evolve into spending more. YouTube, we've talked about being the global gateway anyway. Obviously, there's always going to be the demand for the same data transparency, but I think companies like Magellan AI are already seeking to kind of fix that, and you know, Veritonic are solving it with cross-platform campaign measurement that we hope is going to work.
And
those are a few of the points that are
anything, Paristu, that you would want to add on this topic? I know you've probably met with quite a few of our international partners last week.
Yeah, I've been busy with meeting lots of different networks across Europe. What was surprising for me is the traditional radio networks are really working in this area. So there is a very good balance of competition between, of course, the US-based companies and these networks that they're trying to produce more podcasts and actually give more advertisement toward the local content as well. So that's what I found very healthy, and I see that they are going to that direction. They already have, as Stephen said, I felt that they already had the first experiences last year, and now they are more active and they have a decision, they have the plan and a strategy for the advertisers. That was from the European, but what was surprising for me, I also met with several different networks from African continent. Mm-hmm. So people from Kenya, South Africa, it's growing. So the podcast and audio, digital audio is growing everywhere. It's not limited to Europe, but also we saw growth in Africa. I met with people from MENA. They were telling me about Saudi Arabia with having 67% of adults listen to hourly, 1 hour weekly podcast in Saudi Arabia, which was really stood up for me.
Yeah, I don't remember the name of that show, but I do remember reading about it. I think it's you know, percentage-wise, the most. Sorry?
Finjan.
Okay, yeah, isn't it the most listened to podcast and sort of in terms of percentages like that in the world? I think it is.
Yeah, that's from Saudi Arabia. True.
Yeah. So I think you know, more than ever, I think you know the industry is really starting to truly think global. I think we've obviously been leading a lot of that effort from the advertiser side over the last couple of years, but then there's been more and more press about obviously the growth of podcasting in Latin America and in China and Scandinavia and other countries. But it really feels sort of like it's come to a different level in terms of the sort of acknowledgement it's getting from a global perspective, and people really seeing the opportunity there. And I think, obviously there's always a lot of conversation about data and AI, but with the AI tools that are coming out, and already available, but evolving, the ability to produce content in other languages, to create ads off the cuff in other languages. Although there obviously can be challenges with that, as we talk about a lot, Stephen. But the ability to really take advantage of that international market, I think is more real now than it's ever been before.
Yeah, and I think we touched on that. I was privileged to have done a panel there with some great folks. Craig from Adelicious, David, Lemia, Selena from 7-1. There was some really great speakers, and we talked a lot about transcreation, which we've spoken a lot about in Oxford Road, and it's my big bugbear in the industry, and it's probably the wrong term, bugbear, but it's my big push when speaking to clients to not think about just translating a piece of copy, because it doesn't always work, especially gags and especially sort of topical subjects. You've got to, access your relationships with publishers or other partners or consultants in the markets who can bring the nuance and the subtlety and the idiosyncrasy about the market to really then resonate. I mean, you and I both know that, if we hear a US ad trying to sell something to us as we're Brits, if it hasn't got the right accent or doesn't use the right vernacular, and vice versa. And that's just a subtlety. We talk about global, but everybody's really very, very, very local. There's rivalries between football teams 5 or 6 miles away, and that just happens with normal people as well. So, the adage of act global, think local, whilst it's been used for many, many years, is absolutely still very relevant.
Yeah, for sure.
Going on to that point, the think local, act global, we talk about the big top podcasts in the world globally, but I was speaking to some partners from Italy, and they have the #1 podcast in Italy. It is like the, serial of Italy that's now put podcasting on the map. And so I think us thinking, and what we've done at Oxford Road is, yes, we look at the big podcasts globally, but I think Paris and her team have really been able to go in deep to each of these countries and see where the next serial of Italy is, or the next serial of Germany is. And that's us thinking locally, but also,
I think that's spot on, actually, Rosemary. And Paris, do credit, all power to you. In her role, has been managing for us at Oxford Road to create relationships with, well, I'll let you speak to it, Paris, too. But, the relationship that you built at local markets outside of just the big publishers is critical for allowing our partner clients to actually engage in those markets. I don't know if you want to speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. It's not only the networks, the bigger networks, that we need to really approach them with a local way for business and partnership. But also in the last event, I realized some of the independent podcasters as well, they are very selective in who they want to deal and how they want to deal. So it's like market to market, like how you would deal with Africa. It's totally different than how you would deal in Germany. So that's definitely been, I would say, a journey, a very interesting journey, because not only you have to learn the market landscape, but you have to learn how to deal and how to work with the local partners.
I think as programmatic expands in audio, and now we have access to, much more international inventory, being able to engage that way and engage them in a way that, is localized to them and help them understand, like, they have access. Not only do we have access to all this scale, but they can actually publish this, across the world now, I think is definitely crucial.
And the numbers are showing that. 2.5 billion supposedly invested in podcasts this year. I think the estimates are 2.6. I mean, we know there's also a lot of money still left on the table for YouTube. Dan shared some great numbers with us that could even be as high as overall $7 billion worth of audio spend. But certainly international seems to be, now overtaking the US spend, which is phenomenal.
the tariffs happening in America, that I think a lot of brands are going to look to pivot to the European markets and start to tap into podcast spend over there.
Yeah. But I think also it speaks volumes of kind of brand. When you're a digital business, you don't have the same operating costs or cogs that a manufacturer has, and you can literally at a flick of a switch and some tweaks in language, you would think, obviously having to respect local legislation and GDPR, but your business is so much more transportable.
But I mean, I did read something about that. I think Timu and what's the other one?
Shop.
Yeah, yeah. They've been shifting spend into European markets and on the digital side because of their concerns about tariffs. And I think it's a good point, Rosemary. I wonder if we may see some of that in the podcast space as well. But Jared, I wanted to just come back to you and give you the opportunity. Obviously, you're more focused on sort of digital side, programmatic side. Don't know what types of conversations you're able to have over the course of the couple of days, and obviously it'd be your first time to the show as well. So, kind of a couple of questions really in there for you. I'd like to sort of hear your take on the show just as a newcomer, like for the first time, but also hearing your, were you able to get into, any depth in terms of conversations around programmatic, and what types of conversations were they? Were they more, with suppliers on the inventory side, or more sort of pure ad tech solutions, targeting solutions? How ready do you think the market in podcasting really is, particularly internationally, for programmatic? Because obviously it's sort of well known that it lags pretty long way behind the rest of the programmatic ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious, like you said, it was my first time at the podcast show. I've been to a few of these industry conferences before, but I think Stephen mentioned earlier, I think it really felt like the complete experience in terms of how they're supporting the creators. I mean, it's funny to see, like, on the business side of podcasting, that they had things or everything from like booths to show you how do your own soundproofing setup, also the economics of podcasting. So it was really set up for those creators in mind. I think was fascinating. Another thing that kind of caught my eye was there were so many companies there that were production houses and platforms and ad tech companies. And I didn't really think much of it at first because, obviously we've seen that a lot here, but the more I think about it, it seems like it's kind of a signal that, Europe's podcast market is still a really fertile ground for growth and innovation, especially coming from a US standpoint. And I think we're only going to be able to see that grow even further. Some of the other conversations I was really lucky enough to sit on was a lot of where the AI innovation is happening and how it's happening. We've talked about AI a lot and what's it going to do to the industry. I think that's a much more macro conversation, but there was companies like Acast are starting to offer AI-powered programmatic script reading, where they'll give you, one creator that's able to read off, 10 different things, and then we're able to, put it in DAI style into any of these podcasts. I think was really, really going to change the way monetization happens, but also like how we, keep up with that tech. Another really, I think Flight Path was another really great one. I think I sat on where they were looking at voice cloning and running, tons of 5-second creative hooks, where we can actually, it grabs the listener. So we'll be able to understand like what kinds of experimentation, is, and what, a glimpse into the future a little bit on, what actually is grabbing the listeners. And let's back up a bit. What's ever actually grabbing the listeners, and what type of measurement we're able to pull from it in a very fast-paced way.
Paristu, just also wanted to give you an opportunity. It was your first time at the show as well. Like, what was your impression of it? What did you sort of pick up about the industry, and perhaps the European and the global industry from being there in person, that you may not have picked up, from being in Zoom meetings most of the day?
Yeah, I want to echo everyone else. Definitely from the conversation with the networks, it's clear that there is a greater presence of American companies this year in comparison to other years. But also I've been in other events around Europe, and this felt the most accurate when it comes to podcast. It's really specific to digital audio, and people are really looking for solutions. It's like collaboration and solutions. There are lots of learning happening. That's what I realized. There are bigger companies that they're learning from each other. The networks, the radio networks from France and Germany, that they were actually sharing learnings. This is what I found very interesting, that everyone actually trying to grow together as a continent.
Yeah.
If we just talk about European countries, and everyone is trying to learn and find out, as you said, what's happening in the US, because we are definitely a little bit behind the US market, and they're also trying to see what they can learn from the US. So that was my experience with the event in general.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that about, you know, these sort of European countries having that spirit of sort of learning together and sharing learnings and growing together, because you know, I would say that that's been generally characteristic of the podcast industry as a whole, you know, particularly in the US. Like, there has been a really sort of notable sense of community and togetherness and collaboration in the industry, and you know, obviously many different parts of the industry, they've all grown up together and they've all had success together. And I think that's one of the things that's so interesting about this time in the evolution of podcasting and its history, with, you know, with YouTube now having the space that they do in the industry, the platform they do in the industry, and Spotify pushing into video. You know, it starts to raise some difficult questions for the industry, and will that togetherness, you know, be able to hold in the face of, you know, such big players coming into the industry with, you know, obviously such focused plans for their own growth. But it's interesting to hear you remark on that, and hopefully that spirit can continue to, you know, to help nurture the podcasting industry as we move forwards.
It's interesting. Again, I don't have the stat in front of me, but I was interested what the group thought. I still didn't think enough brands were showing up, or if they did, they were very quiet. And I think that's still a bit of a gap and potentially an opportunity. I know, Giles, you and I had talked about some numbers where the organisers said, "Oh, we're expecting 20 to 30% of our delegates to be from businesses." If that was the case, I mean, yeah, Red Bull were there, and BetterHelp, and all the usual suspects, Athletic Greens, I'm sure. But again, I you know, it's not wishing to. If that was one thing that I didn't see a big change in, is that doesn't mean to be a Debbie Downer, but that's kind of just what I sensed, because we were looking. Obviously, there's great networking opportunities, but
interesting observation. Because last year I was talking with, I can't remember.
I think it's a miss
name,
for brands, if I may add. I think it's
yeah,
huge
for sure.
opportunity.
Absolutely. I think that the show historically has been much more creative focused. But I remember last year when I was talking with one of the women who's responsible for putting on content for the show, because she and I were working on some panel logistics together, and she said to me last year that this was the highest, 2024 was the highest percentage of brands they've ever had as attendees in the show. And I believe it was somewhere in the region of 30 to 40% of the attendees were from brands. But I certainly didn't felt like that had grown this year. I don't know if anyone else has a perspective on that, but yeah, it felt a little bit quiet on the brand front. And again, I'm surprised, because it's such a big area of opportunity for them, such a big, you know, area of interest, and such a unique media space where, you know, everyone knows there's a lot of growth, everyone knows there's a lot of interest. We're coming off the back of the podcast election in the United States. You know, podcasting in a way has never had more momentum and more interest.
I mean, we know they're all going to be listening to this show, so they're all going to find out information anyway, of course. But no, seriously though, I think, you know, if there are brands out there listening, it's an incredible opportunity to get in front of it, to get first market advantage, first mover market advantage, those kind of things. So, yeah.
Now, just with an eye on the time here, going to start moving into closing up this episode. Going to ask each of you for any sort of final thoughts or takeaways, and particularly things that you will be taking from the show that you'll be able to, you know, take forward into, you know, your day-to-day work and the work that you do with clients to help them, you know, drive growth. And I'm going to start here. You know, I mean, because I'm already working on this, but I think it has a renewed focus coming out of that show, and talking to, again, some of these people around measurement and the open ecosystem and the role of YouTube in the space, this issue around measurement is really an essential thing that we need to crack. And that issue about, that example from Bumper, I think is a really great example for the industry of like downloads are down, but actually audience is up. And like we can't just look at downloads anymore. And so we need to get smarter about measurement. We need to find standards for measurement. We need to agree different weights and scores for different types of measurement. And we need to solve the attribution problem. And, I'm working on that with some of our partners now, but I think it needs a renewed focus coming out of this show and, clients. And I think the industry generally will be hearing more about that over the next quarter or so, because we're really determined to put some energy into that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think as more investment grows, that's something that, we've already started to see here. We're working with some of our clients now that are trying to adopt these unique identifiers that are able to anonymize all the IP addresses so that when it's flowing in through a DSP or it's flowing through an SSP, it's able to anonymize before we get, quote unquote, our hands on it or into one of the measurement attribution partners. So we're able to kind of work back and forth so that that investment is able to, propel that forward.
Steve, any final takeaways that you will be taking forwards?
Well, I mean, obviously video is the front door. Talked about international. I think it was very striking to me on seeing a lot of the publishers and what they've been doing. A lot of creators. Integration is clearly winning, right? As we said, it's a platform that's maturing, and we're seeing more and more the rise of brand partnerships that aren't just sitting alongside the content. I'm going to use this term very carefully, but woven into it, right? And I think that's really interesting. As much as it pains me to say it, but Squarespace are doing great stuff. Athletic Greens, and it's not just about buying purely the ad space anymore. It's about getting that co-creation of value, and I think the more we can apply that sort of 360 style brand collaboration, so it lives inside the content, and not just between segments, the more successful we're going to see, and probably attracting more of those brands who are always on the lookout for that. We all know that disruption is always going to be better than interruption, and those sort of ways I think are definitely propelling the platform forward.
Yeah, definitely second that. That seems like a huge area of opportunity as those dissolution of boundaries, just continues.
And we're best placed to help all those brands with it.
Yep. Rosemary, Paristu, any final takeaways that you guys would like to share?
My final takeaway is that I agree with Stephen that I think this is an incredible conference for more brands to join and to be a part of, to see the value of, I think we do all see the value of podcasting, but to really experience the value of podcasting in our industry. And then just, again, that localization and what Parisu and Jared are doing to really understand each country, and that we're not just necessarily buying the top 3 podcasts that are globally, but we're really entrenched in understanding what each of those individual ecosystems. And so from the meetings that I was able to attend with Parisu and Jared, that really was very apparent that that is what we do at Oxford Road.
Thank you. And Paristu, the final word is yours if you would like it.
Yeah, in summary, I can say seeing how much the traditional radio network is trying to get to this space means that they already see the shift of the dollar coming from the offline world to podcast and digital audio. And for us, it's a great opportunity, of course, to have the partnership with them and with a lot of new independent podcaster. I also think that there is a bigger competition is happening between the local content and the US based content. So that's why also the US companies, they see the value of the local content and trying to actually put the investment to that direction. definitely a great opportunity for us as a company, and also for our client, of course.
Well, thank you all so much. It was a great conversation, and thank you for being there at the event last week. We appreciate you taking part in this conversation today, and thank you for joining the roundtable. The Media Roundtable is brought to you by Oxford Road, where we want you to succeed in audio and creator-based media, to use influence for good. As members of the marketing community, we have the power to advance voices that don't just entertain, but edify, to build bridges across differences and preserve fair-minded discussion around the most important topics of our age. If you're a marketer looking to align your brand values with extraordinary business outcomes, reach out to Oxford Road by visiting oxfordroad.com and subscribing to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. The Media Roundtable would love to hear from you. If you have any feedback or suggestions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at info@mediaroundtable.com. And finally, I have to give a worthy plug to our second favorite podcast, or perhaps equal first, Ad Infinitum, hosted by our very own Stu Redwine, VP of Creative Services, which is a show uniquely focused on the art and science of creating ads and creative executions in audio. And it is a great listen. There's a ton of really good talent on that show, experts in publishing, in creation, in psychology, in behavioral science. There's a lot of really good material in that show. It's a great credit to Stu, and really encourage you all to give that a try. That's it from us. Thank you to our guests, Stephen, Rosemary, Parastu, and Jared. And of course, the expert team behind the scenes, Haley, Ruby, Bianca, Kyle, Ezra, Mary Jane, Neil, Everett, and the team at Podcast One. As always, influence responsibly.